So I'm actually back here after like 6 months. My previous topic seemed to be much more popular, but I think for product managers, understanding what I'm going to talk about today is actually really, really critical. Last time I talked about AI and deep learning and things like that. And I guess that's the spirit of the times, put AI into everything. But this is really, really critical. I'm glad you guys are here. Just a quick intro who I am. I started my PM life at Microsoft. I was there for about 10 years, and I worked in both the enterprise and consumer side and platforms and products, things like that. I started in Windows Server, good old days of actual physical servers, built home server, worked a little bit in Azure and Windows Phone, and last 4 years I've actually been involved in building AI products, first-party AI products for Microsoft, like our chatbot and virtual agent, which actually handles 100% of the support. And then I was actually involved in building it into an actual platform that others, third parties, can actually use. And that's what I was actually doing right before. It's going to be part of Dynamics 365. I didn't actually have a chance to release it, but it's coming soon. But I decided to move to LivePerson, which is actually a company, a lot of history in conversational commerce, and they are looking to. They just started an office in Seattle in July, and they're actually looking to build a lot of this AI as a platform to build. They allow companies to actually do stuff like that and build bots, design that, deploy that, like all in a seamless way with all kinds of messaging like Apple Business Chat, WhatsApp, all of those. It fits right into what I was doing and a lot of things, and we're actually hiring, so we can, reach out to me. We're going to double or triple our capacity in the next 6 months. Anyway. Today's talk, and by the way, I think there is. I think it might be okay to take questions along the way because not a big group today. So I'm going to talk about the world of platforms and products, and platforms are something we don't hear a lot about. We don't see them. Products, and I'll tell you how I distinguish between them. But they're incredibly valuable. In fact, more people work on these areas in the software industry than on actual, software products or apps or things like that. I will give some ideas about how to be a product manager and like some usual tips about what to do, But I think the core goal of this talk is to actually talk about what happens in the back, and for me, part of being a product manager is just being aware of a lot of things. And hopefully this will help you gain that perspective. We're going to look a little bit ahead as well because I think the landscape's changing. And I actually don't know if all the roles we have in the software industry are going to remain exactly the way it is. Our software is going to be built the same. So we're going to talk a little bit about that as well but that's forward-looking. Don't bet on it. Like that's all how I feel about it. And obviously Q&A. So the 4 most valuable companies in the world, right? Apple, Google, Amazon, and Microsoft. While they have a vast portfolio of products, each of these companies, they have been successful in one or the other. And I feel Apple and Google are really hardcore product companies. And I'll talk about what the difference are. And Microsoft and Amazon are more platform companies. And the reason I talk about this is that all these companies, Microsoft has tried stuff like Windows Phone and all kinds of things, but keeps failing. Look at Google as well, like Amazon as well, like Fire Phone, complete failure. But look at AWS, just one of the best. Google, same thing. Lots of really good products, like and I call Google Search as a product because it's a very end user focused, like it does something very simple. They are really trailing behind in some of the platform kind of initiatives, like they have like Google Cloud Platform and things like that. And today's talk is going to be a lot about what makes some of these companies successful in one or the other, what kind of organization structures, what kind of skills, and how do you as a product manager build a platform versus a product, things like that. And why, and I'm going to talk about that there is no magic bullet, and the same things that Apple does is completely useless at Microsoft and vice versa. And so quick definition, and we'll probably go back and forth a little bit. To me, platforms are like Lego blocks. By itself, they have some value, but you kind of take these Lego blocks to actually build a car. And the product is more like a car because it actually has very specific use cases and scenarios. It drives people from one place to the other. With a Lego block, it allows you to build a car, but you can also build a truck, or you can also build a spaceship, things like that. So a lot more flexible, right? Platforms. Some key differences, and I talked about that. Simple customer maps, the typical products you see, they have maybe a few different types of customers. A lot of even products like Uber, they have basically two customers. One is the drivers, and the other is the people who are taking the Uber, right? While platforms, they actually exist in the ecosystem, and one of the goals of platform companies is to enable the ecosystem. And I'm going to talk about the map as well in another slide, but they thrive and they allow the whole ecosystem. In fact, that's one of the reasons the platform companies are so much bigger. Again, because they have simple customer maps, they have unique scenarios and customizations. While platforms, most of the successful platforms actually are open and extensible frameworks. Highly integrated experiences, while platforms can live with slightly loosely coupled experiences. Now, it is not required that platforms be loosely coupled, fragmented, or decoupled. But what ends up happening is it's incredibly hard to make a platform into an iPhone, which is like pixel perfect. Every interaction leads to the other, seamless, frictionless, all of that. It just so happens, but things are getting better and better, and a lot of web-based, especially, have. And the last thing, this goes into economics, and I might actually have to dive a little bigger here. So all companies in the internet era in the last 10 years benefit from network effects. I took the example of Uber. More drivers means more people using Uber, and vice versa. So those are network effects. Messaging apps, like more of my friends are on WhatsApp, so it helps me being in WhatsApp. Facebook, Google, things like that. More people search on Google. Google's product is better. But that value of the network is, for products, they typically the company which is enabling that network actually enjoys that value a lot more. Like Google keeps most of its dollar value from all of this. Facebook does that as well. While platforms, like AWS, Microsoft, Azure, these kind of platforms, because they thrive in the ecosystem, most of the value actually comes from people who are going to use, actually build products on using AWS, and think about Netflix being built on AWS backend. And the value of that network is actually, there's still network effects there. More people using AWS allows them to actually get value out of that. But the value of these networks are really external. And this is why some companies, Google versus Microsoft, Amazon versus Apple, they are based, like every process, their organization structure, their culture, the way people are promoted, and like the things that make them successful are things that feed into that. The whole of Apple is designed to produce an iPhone every 2 years, right? Anyway, so let's talk a little bit about the ecosystem, and this is why. So typical platform, like software platforms, and there are other kinds of platforms you can talk about. AWS, for instance, developers, first-party products. You need some management experiences. Third-party integration. There's usually, by the way, the other thing that's often talked about in the platform versus product thing is the enterprise versus consumer. I think while it's largely true that most of these platforms are targeted towards enterprises, but there are enough consumer platforms as well. Amazon.com is actually a very, very consumer platform. Amazon.com, and this is another example of how Amazon always thinks about, it started as a place to buy stuff, but Amazon actually, there are more third-party sellers on Amazon.com right now than first-party Amazon. Amazon's like 3 businesses: AWS, logistics, and the marketplace. And each of these are actually, more people outside of Amazon use these things than Amazon itself. So sales, services, system integrators, enterprises, marketplace, all the apps that are built on top of it, their users. So there are these consumer apps and the enterprise apps, and all the other users. This is what makes platforms more complex. Simple as that. I think this is a quote from Bill Gates. Apparently, he said that to Zuckerberg, Mark Zuckerberg, who was trying to explain why Facebook is a platform, and he says that's complete bullshit. Economic value of everybody that uses it exceeds the value of company that creates it, and that's not true about Facebook. So it's not a platform, it's an aggregator. It brings people together, and it goes back to what I was talking before about the network effects being internal versus external.
One question.
Yeah.
So how would you categorize companies which give out platforms to build stuff on, like for example, let's say Google, Android? It can be called, it can be considered as a platform because it allows you to build.
Yeah, Android's a platform. I would say that I think Android and iOS are platforms. Probably iOS is one of the only examples of a closed platform that's successful. The App Store, actually, iOS App Store. Yeah. I would say they're platforms as well. Yeah, as I said, like most of these companies obviously have a mix. Like, Apple has things which can be called platforms. Google obviously has, and Google has also Google Cloud Platform. They're really trying to get there. They have a lot of AI stuff and others, but like most of these big companies are a mix of it, and I think it's important to understand that for a lot of companies, some things are strategic versus tactical. Like some products may align really well with them. From what I see Google doing, their Android strategy is mainly around getting people to give up their data, while Apple's is completely different, right? Like they're both operating systems. Apple's is like you get the best phone, best experience by doing this because it's highly integrated hardware and software. They have no interest in data. They probably have some interest, but the entire strategy, if you really look 30,000, 60,000 feet, the strategy of how the like exactly same kind of operating systems are being used differently to align with the strategy. For Google, it's still search, ads, things like that. That's what feeds into like all of the Android strategy is focused on feeding that in, not as a like they don't make any money out of they make some money out of Android, but not a lot. Compared and also compared to the other old great platform, Windows and the Windows world, it was an operating system as well, and it was probably, in my opinion, one of the perfect platforms. Open things like. I know a lot of people hate it. A lot of people like there's all kinds of but that is one of the most classic ways how it really helped ecosystems build, like apps, and so many business models and things like that were built around the Microsoft's ecosystem. And it's just not Windows, it's Office products, it's the server products, identity, things like that all helped. The sales motion, the professional services, all of those came together to actually provide that kind of platform. Again, like 3 examples of operating system, 3 different strategies, and I probably there are probably a few more which fall into the same categories.
So, just to follow up on that.
Sure.
Like you mentioned Windows. Now, Windows can be considered as a platform on to which you have other products which come. So in that case, you would say you can classify that the PowerPoint is a product on top of it?
So yeah, so I think so it is important to understand, as you can see, that when you're looking at a platform, like it's also that, you know, when you think about it, there's a strategy behind it. There are first-party products, right? But the main goal of that is to actually enable a bunch of all of these scenarios and the ecosystem to thrive. Many would argue that individually, like Microsoft's products, you know, apples to apples may not be great, but you know, put together, the fact that the identity works together, like you know, your email and Office products and operating systems, all of them work together, is a bigger value than let's say I had to go pick small products and try to get them together. Individually, there may be a lot of other products, like just let's say Office communications. Like I know Microsoft's doing really well with Teams, but arguably Slack is better, and they were before. But Slack's on its own. In my company, I use Slack, G Suite, and a bunch of other products, while Microsoft, the team actually integrates, maybe it doesn't integrate really well, but with SharePoint and all Office products, all of that. And that's what brings all of the value to the platform. They kind of feed each other, and they're also open enough that other people, other third parties can build solutions on top of them. Again, some of these were also slightly old school concepts. With the cloud, some of the integrations are even easier to an extent. But the main goal is to think about the ecosystem overall. And I'm going to talk about how when you make trade-offs, the classic PM thing about how to prioritize features, how to think about customers, how it may vary a little bit if you're thinking about a product versus an ecosystem. All right. I had this slide. It's more of the old. I'm sure you guys have seen this. Every day on LinkedIn and I hear about functional versus divisional, collaborative, independent, meeting-driven, document-driven, agile, Scrum, Lean, all these, and lots of these 5 steps to be effective, right? I'm sure there are other PMs coming here and saying, I'll give you five rules that will make you a great product manager. Here's the thing. So I have, even at Microsoft, when a huge company, every team was different. And there are reasons some things work better in others than in other companies. So I'll take the example of Amazon and Apple as a contrasting example. Both are known to be highly customer-focused companies. In fact, Amazon has a leadership principle called customer obsession, and in fact, they do provide. But maybe that's where it ends. Apple's a very functional org, meaning that functional versus divisional means basically that there's one divisional means that you have different product groups, while functional means that you're functionally organized PMs, and there are no different products. And they're also known to be extremely meeting driven. Everything like too many meetings, right? And there's probably a reason for it, because when you build the iPhone, it needs to be pixel perfect. It needs to every button from here, whoever's building that, to the notification, they all must gel together and come out. So there's a high level of integration and coordination required, and that works very well. Amazon is completely opposite. Like Jeff Bezos has these rules about the 2 pizza rule, which is like never have meetings more than where you cannot accommodate with more than like about 6 people, right? 2 pizzas. They're very document driven, which means that you write stuff down. And they have the famous PR work back documents, those kind of things. And they're also very like each team is very independent. The product managers, like all of the team works independently, develop their strategy. And the goal of that is actually how AWS is also built, and Amazon. It's like you basically come together to agree on the contract. Again, going back to the Lego blocks, you don't need to, all you need to agree on is that this Lego block fits into that. It may be a little, like what happens is slightly pixelated, that's a trade-off with platforms. But if you want to encourage independent and microservices based, and each independent that can be actually used and built as a Lego block, you need to have those kind of organizations. So here's the key thing I wanted to talk about. Like it really depends. What I have done in Teams, Microsoft now is to actually figure out, because most of us are not CEOs, right? So, we're not going to be setting direction, but you do that in your smaller groups, like what works best for you. If you are working on something that is a more closer to a product where you need that kind of really seamless experiences, you need to have those high like reviews and coordination, collaboration, things like that. If you do need them to, if you can separate them, you will organize slightly differently. And I've seen scrums don't work well in some areas. I've seen scrums work really well. If you're a platform, fail fast is a really bad idea. As I said, the whole ecosystem depends on you. So with a product, you maybe if you can recover quickly, you'll probably but you screw up API in AWS, you not only screw all the customers, but Netflix doesn't work, Airbnb doesn't work, Uber doesn't work, everybody, right? So fail fast is probably not a great idea in those kind of things. Experimentation, not a great idea. Usually, it's slower. So it really depends on what works. I have started thinking about this a lot more because and to actually also experiment with processes and things in your team, because it depends on a lot of things, right? Including people. Like take the sports analogy, like for some team, a coach and an offensive strategy works really well. You take it the same strategy to another team, just doesn't, because they don't have the people and don't have those kind of skills. So you really need to figure that out, and it's really good to read about all this. Like, I'm not saying like throw them all away, but it's also useful to not be very fixated about what like one or the other. Yeah.
So I'm interested in your perspective, especially on contemporary projects for platforms. There seems to be this kind of, as someone once described it, massively parallel single tasking mentality that goes on. That it has to all be agile and Scrum. And even on a large platform type project.
Yeah.
Well, I see a lot of people going in with that mindset. Well, how do we take this platform and deconstruct it so that we can use these methodologies? Are you seeing that? Are you seeing are people being successful with that? Or are you seeing this more of kind of setting things up for future technical debt?
Let me see if I can answer that, because I think what so the first part about is like talking about platforms as a whole, but I want to take, like in this presentation, I want to take it back to a more day-to-day thing that works well. And there's good news and bad news there, because what you just said, I might be able to, and we can come back to that.
I think a point about like agile and fail fast, even cloud service providers do that. They said there are a lot of internal rings and
there's ways to do that. Yeah.
Like we still fail fast, but like we fail early and internally rather than have all our customers work.
Yeah, I'm just saying that's true about like products like Facebook, Google as well. My main point was that the cost of failure, is usually a much higher in these kind of platforms, and sometimes, and I'll talk about that a bit as well. One of the things that happens with platforms is anytime you release something, think very hard about whether you want to release it, because somebody's going to use it and you're going to be supporting it for the next 10 years. Any API, anything like I just read that there's finally a plan to sunset Windows 7. What was this? 2006, right? 2007 when it was released. So, and that's true about even the cloud-based APIs. Like you release something, you got to be ready. So you think really hard about, because somebody is using it. If it's a product, you have like, you can send an update, everybody will get it. Especially with cloud products, it's nobody, you can have rings and you can experiment, things like that. But if somebody else is using that and depending on it, So that was the other thing about fail fast, and like you gotta make sure that every time you change, you're not changing, you're breaking things in the back. Yep.
Yeah, I mean, so I think my question is also relevant to the same thing. You might come to it later. So as you were saying that fail fast and experimentation is something quite difficult for platforms. So in that case, what's the procedure to you really get feedback from your customer? For example, if you want to come up with new features, you want to experiment with them, do you have like a closed set of customers?
So yeah, I don't want to. That was not the point. Like, you should experiment. In fact, with cloud-based products, like there's lots of ways to actually experiment and iterate and learn and things like that. But the main thing was that in platforms, often the velocity of changes may be a little slower just because the dependencies are like a much long running, and the cost of failure is actually way, way higher. A lot of like for Facebook, typically they probably run 5-10% experiments. And it's okay to have slightly bad experience while the experiment is running, because some experiments will be negative. But it'll be really hard for Amazon to say, hey, I'm going to try this new algorithm that Netflix is using. Probably we don't know that it'll probably improve performance of your streaming, but it may not. So it's really hard to do that on your customers. You can do that in pilots and other ways, but it's really hard to do that on live customers for especially those kind of products.
Like when you are doing it maybe on a pilot or on a staging environment, so in that case, do you really closely collaborate with some of the customers to get immediate feedback?
Yeah, I think especially on the enterprise side, that's actually very common. So anyway, so I wanted to bring it back to the PM side of things. Okay, the good news, bad news. The good news is you're trying to get into product management. So you will most likely work in a small area of this, and you'll be asked to go, hey, go build this specific feature or experience, right? The good news is it's kind of still starts with customers. The only thing is there are too many customers. But the thing is, most of the time, let's say you were AWS, right? You probably own like a small, what's the experience to set up a VM, like things like that. Again, it's very important to think about. So again, those classic principles, who are your customers? If they're developers, go understand them, what they are. Typically in platforms, there's usually your user, but there's usually another set of users who the customers. So sometimes in some products, it is useful to understand that and get that into the needs. I was working on building these SDKs for some of the AI stuff we were doing, and I actually ended up writing two sets of user stories. One was for the developers who were going to use the SDKs. The others were for the end users who were going to use some of these AI products. And it's very important to write that down. And a lot of different companies have different ways of doing that. Amazon has that 6-page PR FAQ document, working backwards document. Microsoft has framing memos, scenarios, use cases. Google has objectives, OKRs, things like that. But the main goal is to write them down very clearly what you're trying to do, right? And ask, how can I make their life simpler? So for me, like when I was doing the SDK thing, as an example I provide, I I said, developers are lazy like anybody else. They don't like doing this stuff. They don't have to. They like putting time on things that add value. So my direction for the team was, look, I'm going to do a presentation, and that's going to be a 15-minute presentation. I'm going to start a project, and I should be able to get an app running using these SDKs within that 15 minutes. Make that happen. And it really forces you to think that what are each step in that was a very developer specific workflow, but being really customer focused really helps, because you can say that, oh, people don't like there's usually this overhead of code that you have to write always. Instantiating the SDK, things like that. All of that, we actually built a small tool that auto-generates from a form, things like that. But I could do that whole demo in like 15, like start a new Visual Studio project. I'll write an app, Windows app. I'll drag and drop the SDK and build and show something working. It's a hello world example, but it really tells, and then they can really focus on things they really need to build. So you can always make things simpler for any kind of customer or user, and that's a good news. Again, user stories and work backwards. It's actually useful. When I first started, I was like, why do we write these stories? Like, what's the problem? Just go build it. But I think it's very useful, mainly because you can really take out all the details about things that typically happen in software companies, whether we're going to use this framework, that framework, this coding language. None of that matters. They do matter eventually when you try to make trade-offs, but initially it shouldn't. It really focuses on the goal and gets you there. Anyway, again, quoting Jeff Bezos, I love this quote actually, because it says, one thing I love about customers is that they are divinely discontent. Their expectations are never static. We didn't ascend from our hunter-gatherer days by being satisfied. It just means that if you have satisfied customers for any product, platform, APIs, whatever, most likely your product is obsolete because nobody's using it. Because once you give them, they would ask for the next one because some competitor is giving slightly better experience or pushing them to do that. In terms of execution, product managers still work on this, and I borrowed it from my previous talk as well. You would typically be making trade-offs between these three. But I think the difference when I've worked on more platform, those kind of products, is that often sometimes you prioritize things that benefit the overall ecosystem. So for instance, let's say you have a budget to build a better UX versus providing some extensibility. A core product team might just go and build that nice, really seamless experience, but in a platform thing, say, no, the extensibility is a way more valuable thing, maybe not for my product, but maybe for all of the other people that are using it. So the trade-offs are often this subtle difference, and these discussions are going on, which is why I started with that whole map, because I think one of the things when I started in Windows Server originally, was that simple thing. I was too focused on there, and sometimes it was very hard for me to understand some decisions that were being made. I'm like, this makes no sense. Why would I go, do that? This is better user experience. I've always been taught that always give the best experience to your users, and often in platforms you make that trade-off, to get there. You may not be, you still might be focused on your own product and still doing the best, but sometimes it's useful to understand that. We talked a little bit about this. Delivery and revision cycles are a little different. Often, especially if you have customers and customers, you release something, you have to support it for a long time. So if in doubt, keep it out. That became my motto. Like if somebody tells me, we're not sure, should we build this feature, should we not build this feature? Okay, we're not. Because even one customer makes us support that, and that's cost and things like that. Yes, we can release it, we can get feedback, and if we have enough people asking for a feature, then we can definitely introduce it. But it's way better to err on the side of fewer things initially because of the long support cycles. Again, yeah, much harder to sunset features once they're out, especially in the platform world. So establishing feedback loops, like I think one of you asked about this. So I think of the platform world kind of as a restaurant. You're the chef. It's still your philosophy what kind of food. But as a chef who is designing and maybe in the back of the kitchen, you may not have the direct interaction with the people who are eating the food. So you got to hear your waiters, who are the main customer-facing people. In big companies, these are sales and marketing and the field teams, because they are hearing directly from the people. In products especially in consumer products where you have lots of users, you can gather a lot of data and make a lot of data-driven decisions. Often big companies like the AWS and Amazon's, their one big contract is going to be Boeing. And now Boeing has thousands of customers themselves who are, their IRE people and things like that. Like same with AWS and Netflix. Netflix has millions of users and customers, but for Amazon, Netflix is the one customer. So it's really hard to sometimes get the requirement. So you really need to listen to what they're doing. So again, going back to one of my early days at Microsoft, building Windows Server, one of the things I did for like maybe 6 months to 1 year, and I highly recommend people think about those kind of roles. I actually worked on this program that Microsoft used to have called Technology Adoption Program, where beta products and pre-release version of products, we worked directly with the enterprises. I was in the small and medium businesses. So we would recruit these businesses, we'll provide them the support and things like that, but we'll work directly with them throughout a whole year on pre-release products, putting it on that. And this is one of the few times where us as product managers, I actually got to finally see who uses our product, because those days, once we release it, it was the resellers, system integrators, all of the consultants, they are the ones who are actually going and supporting these customers. So for me, it was really eye-opening. For me, it was those trade-offs I'm talking about. I was actually delivering something very small, which is backup and storage technologies, and I was truly focused. And there was times when I thought that why some decisions are being made, but that really opened my eyes. When you go there and you see their problems on a day-to-day basis, especially small businesses, tech is the least of their concern. They wanted to get away, and the way I thought about the whole product completely changed. So these are the kind of feedback loops and processes that companies use quite a lot. Um, yeah, I didn't say enough about this. A little more flexibility. Again, this may be more true about enterprise customer. If Boeing or Goldman Sachs comes and says, "I want this feature," you just do it. It's just like even if it doesn't make sense. And that's, by the way, one of the other things about maybe companies like Amazon and Microsoft. They will do it for you, even if it maybe seems like a weird thing. But customers are right, always. They pay us money, so so a lot more flexibility there. What ends up happening is a lot of spaghetti code and a lot of spaghetti features eventually that you need to maintain. But that's one of the things about platforms. Questions?
Is there like a good amount of feedback that will help you to decide whether that feedback is to 1,000 people?
Yeah, it depends, right? So the more is better. The more data you have, the better. In the especially consumer products with millions of users, if more than half those people are of a million sample, half those people are saying they want something, that's a really good statistical significance, right? But if you have like a few big whale companies, it's not statistically significant.
So would you consider that feedback, or would you move on with your
Oh, you do it. That's what I was saying, right? If Boeing comes and says, "I want this feature," they're the only one, you do it because.
even if only few people want it?
Well, it's not few people, right? It's probably a feature that's really, really critical for them. And Netflix says, I want you to give me this API. I'm sure Amazon goes over and out to actually make that happen. Mainly because, it's just so there I would say the metric is not the number of people, but the amount of dollars. That may be a good metric. But again, at any point of time, especially complex products like that, you often have this long backlog of use cases or scenarios that's constantly feeding from the sales team, the fields team, your own team that you think you should build. And you're constantly, one of the things that PMs do is constantly juggling and making those decisions. And you use a bunch of inputs to make those decisions. One of them is customer feedback. You can also, sometimes you may not actually build the product, but maybe just have, just ask them like, "Hey, we're thinking about building it in this way." Because often a customer will ask it, like, "I want this feature," but if you look deeply, they probably the requirement is something different. So you may want to build it slightly different than or the way they've been asking. That old quote. I think may not be Henry Ford or maybe Henry Ford. Like if we asked our customers, they would have asked for faster horses, or and I think Edison it was like longer lasting candles. So you have to dig deep into what the ask is as a product manager, and that's one of the things that is quite. You do that. Okay, they're saying this, but what do they really want? And that's why going back to the use cases and maybe understanding what their use case is, what scenario are they trying to enable for their customers and users. So that's one way to do that.
So one thing is like you said, like we will accommodate the customization based on like a specific feedback.
Mm-hmm.
So let's say it's like $1 or $2.
Yeah.
So how do I get away from doing a point-based solution rather than still be a platform. So if you try to keep solving like
Yeah.
specific customer needs,
Yeah.
they have a very entirely different scope. So then I'm just only solving their problems, right?
Yeah. So it is a balance. So what you try to do is first understand what that need is and see if it's a common need. Because just because only one company asked it, maybe like 2 months later another might ask the same thing. And just to make yourself future proof, you may want to build it in a way. So let's say it's a specific thing and a specific customization somebody wants, and rather than just building that, you take the message that there is one customer who's asking for customizations. They're asking for one specific thing, but maybe the need is just, they need more customization. So you go back and check what if this one we have to give because we make accommodations and they are $1 billion account or a multi-million dollar account. So, but how can we make this in a way that tomorrow if another person asks for some customizations, we can add to it. So you architect and you design the feature. So those are the kind of things you end up discussing when it's a one-off thing. And I've had plenty of those, I'm pretty sure somebody else is going to ask this, so let's think about it, let's think through it, because again, that same principle, you provide something, you're going to support it for.
Quick question, other than the length of the cost of supporting legacy or a sunsetted feature, do you ever consider the financial viability of the product or the feature that you want to put in? Or do you kind of leave that for other groups to say, yeah, we think we can make money?
No, there is, yeah. I think it depends on the product, what level you are as well. But yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think we're all, at least most of these companies are here to make money. So absolutely, business viability is a serious consideration. Like how can, what kind of features will allow us to sell more? But is there anything specific about business viability?
Well, yeah, I mean, in the abstract, I get that. I guess I'm thinking that in the kinds of projects that you've been working on, do you typically find yourself in a situation where that's an input in terms of your prioritization? Is it a large input? Does it just tend to be kind of a ancillary sort of data point that you look at? What's kind of the division of labor on that aspect?
Yeah, so obviously there are larger companies like Microsoft. There is a division of labor. A lot of the financial and how we take it to market, how we monetize it, there are specific people who are in charge, while program managers and product managers are very focused on building the technology. Yes, we align.
That kind of shapes the
Yeah.
Okay.
So oftentimes something that is really great for customers may not be great for business. So there's this old study about what makes customers happy, and it's free stuff. Really, it comes down to this. Basically, it comes down to this. You give free stuff, people are happy. And imagine if Amazon did that, or like any retailer did that. They'll have the happiest customers, but they'll not make any money. So there's always this, these conflicting goals that I want to make people happy, but at the same time, I want to keep enough profit. So let's say the discussion about how should we roll out Prime? Like, it's already 5-6 years ago, but we are giving a discount. We are giving certain benefits like 2-day shipping. Now it's like 1-day shipping or just 1 hour shipping. But that costs Amazon money. But it also gets them more customers. So there is some calculation or some discussion that happens where you make that trade-off. How much is that? I was building a lot of these customer care support products where typically, and a lot of automation and bots and virtual agents, right? And typically there are 2 drivers. One is 2 KPIs which are used. One is the cost. Like every time somebody picks up a phone call or chats in the contact centers, there's a cost. One of the goals of bots is to actually reduce that cost. So we could reduce the cost completely by not having any agents, any people, and but your customer satisfaction will tank. So we prepared some goals and worked with finance, what level we should go to, and we actually ran experiments to see how we can get there. There's this fascinating world of multi-arm bandit tests, which is basically and they're solvable by AI, which is actually a very interesting field right now, where you have constrained resources and limited constrained resources, and giving one actually ends up having, and how to optimize that. And there are models and AI and reinforcement learning things that we can apply there. So yeah, those are done. A lot of them are actually going into the software itself, those financial models. But absolutely, some of the internet companies, they don't initially think about money at all. Just get the users, and models like freemiums and pay up, and those can work, and they do work a little bit better these days because of these network effects in the internet and cloud world, where if you actually get all the users, it's a winner take all. And eventually you can figure out ways to monetize Facebook when that way. Initially when AWS was going, they were also like very, very cheap, and now it's even cheaper. But sometimes the companies would go with the loss leader. A quick thing about why, I don't know if you've heard about it. This is personally a very exciting area for me. Very interested. I love science fiction, but this is actually reality. So do you guys know about Industry 4.0? This is from the president of the World Economic Forum, Carl Schwab. He wrote this book, and about Industry 1.0 was when the first time things were automated, the loom, machine loom. Industry 2.0 was mainly driven by electrical power, and 3 is mostly automation, the digital age, and the 4th one is actually we're living it in right now, or at least that's the belief. And the reason people talk about this is each industrial revolution changed things completely. The economics, the kind of jobs people did, cultures, these two brought in the middle class, which never ever existed before. This brought in like capital, like it was so hard to raise capital earlier, like these are economics concepts. But just to give you like 10 years ago, maybe 12 years ago, if you went to Best Buy or one of those companies that do not exist anymore with 5,000 in your pocket, you bought a calculator, you can buy a game, a gaming device, an alarm clock, phone, etc. You can blow up that 5,000. All of that is there in this $600 device now. and just go play that game. Like you can probably find a catalog from 10 years ago.
It's $1,000 now.
Huh?
It's $1,000 now.
Yeah, so a lot of people, like, they say, hey, I can't imagine buying $1,000 phone, but it's replaced like a $10,000 worth of thing. But a lot of Industry 3.0 was about productivity. So it increased, like, this is a prime example of productivity. So what's happening in the fourth one, we're seeing like fusing physical, digital, and biological worlds. Like, is there any area right now which is not a tech area? Like if you look at medicine, if you look at DNA, like printing and vision, all of those, right? Massively connected systems, IoTs, and Internet of Things, intelligent and autonomous. Again, I think they're going to change the landscape significantly. Like, are we going to be driving cars? My CTO was giving a presentation this morning where he talked about where he met somebody from Daimler, Mercedes-Benz, and the head of AI in that group. And they're saying that 10 years from now, we are not going to be a car company. We're going to be an experiences company. Right now, we sell the cars to the driver. Everything about a Benz is about the driving experience. BMW as well. If you do not drive anymore, our brand's dead. Like, so it comes to natural, ambient, hyper-personalized experiences. The last 10 years were about, when we were building UX, it was about mouse and clicks and, you can read design of small things, all of those. I think a lot of those might actually be quite obsolete. If you look at, like, Google just came out with the gesture API. That's something that, first time the mouse was developed in, I think, the Park Palo Alto Research Labs. They came out with some APIs like click means this, move that. So they just came up with a whole set of gesture APIs. If you remember that movie where you're pulling stuff, you can do things like that. There is obviously the 1D, 2D, 3D. Then there is a 0D, which is like all voice and expressions, things like that. People are thinking about how those will be there. A lot of people believe that the next industrial revolution is actually going to be about improving quality of life versus productivity, especially with so much technology coming in, a lot of the physical barriers being removed. It can actually really take, even now, right, like we live in Seattle, we live in the US, but half of the world's population is super poor and like they can't even get by basic stuff. But one of the beliefs is that it's actually going to finally focus on something that is, if you remember Maslow's hierarchy of needs, where it went from, basic food and shelter to now self-actualization. We might actually be reaching there. Again, this might be all science fiction. Finally, like, you might be actually dealing what you're selling is experiences versus acquisitions. I took the example of a car. It's not going to be about the outer side of the car or the driving experience, owning the car. It might be actually about experiences. Now, it may not seem like we're, every day we're dealing with traffic and this and that, and, I don't have change, but we are, and I personally strongly believe that. And the reason I bring this up is all of the stuff I talked about, products and platforms, are Industry 3.0. We learned in the last 10 years that having product managers are good. We learned that a certain way organizations must be there. We learned, and those have been successful. this revolution may actually completely turn its head around, where the most valuable job out there might be the AI ethics guy. Who knows? I don't know. But anyway, I wanted to bring this up because I actually believe that we're going to see a lot of change. It's like I'm really excited about it. Hopefully, by the time my job becomes irrelevant, I will be, safely retired. But I want you guys to think about it, and it's because we may actually see a complete change in the ways companies are organized, how software is developed. Does it really require, like if you look at AutoML and a lot of which actually learns, do you need software engineers or do you need like supervisors, like for supervised trainings, things like that. But anyway, something to leave you guys with. I just wanted to bring this up because I think the world of platforms is going to change a lot. Any questions?
What do you love the most about being a product manager?
What do I love? So I think for me, it's about it's about being able to shape the strategy and actually drive that. It's also technology itself is an area that's really exciting for me. Like, I actually love my job, the industry, and what I'm doing. As a product manager, I used to be a developer as well before. But as a product manager, you get to shape that. You get to deal with a certain kind of human, technical, business challenges that you don't actually face every day. I actually joined LivePerson because it's a really small company, and I saw this opportunity. They were on the brink of this AI and other things, and I felt that I could really. By the way, Microsoft used to be a customer of LivePerson, and I know them very well because of that, and in the same area. So I felt I could really go, and I listened to a few of the CTO's talks and his things, and I felt that I could really go and shape that, and that's why I joined. That's what I like about it.
So, I mean, in a platform, so for example, if I talk about cloud, when AWS was first in the market, I think they had a differential advantage. But however, when Azure came in and Google came in, platforms can kind of turn into commodity, right? And
sure, Lego blocks, yeah.
I mean, how do you really maintain that differential advantage compared to any other companies offering the same services?
So I don't know if you guys listen to this guy called Ben Thompson, but one of my favorite tech strategy. I highly recommend you to read his blog, Strategy or something, and his exponent, which is so he does talks as well. So he talks about how companies build moats around there, and I would actually argue that the operating system is also a commodity, but companies build those differentiators through a variety of things. Brand is actually really important for, especially in the consumer products. Like if people trust brands, like building that over time, everybody will go buy that one. Continually innovating and being slightly ahead, especially in platforms. So I gave an example of Slack versus Teams, and Teams came way from behind. It's actually taken over within like a couple of years. Like it's more number of users than Slack, and the reason is this: the sales guy who goes to a company, he says, "Oh, I have all of this Azure stuff. You get all of this Office productivity stuff. Oh, by the way, I also have And then they will reply, but Slack has this feature, and you can say it's coming, but look at all the other stuff. So you build that moat around that, and that ecosystem really helps, because overall, individually, there might be other products which are much better, but together all the other stuff, and those are the trade-offs. Like, it's possible that the guy, the product manager in Teams, actually did not build that feature because they had to go build that other extensibility with SharePoint or Office or something, and those may be the conscious choice to do that, to make sure you are in the ecosystem, right? Products do that in certain ways. Google's goal is to keep you using Google's products. One way is Android, and Maps. Maps is really, because that's a lot of people actually explored the world through Maps. Same with Facebook, and for a lot of consumer products is to keep you in their product thing. Same for platforms, to keep coming back for more. And it's also like, especially on the enterprise side, right? You've already made a huge amount of investment, so it's actually an incremental investment for them, and they're using some of the legacy leverage as well. At least that's my. Now, yeah, there are always disruptors, right? And lots of, I would say, companies born in the cloud may not need or want some of the old legacy Microsoft products. They might go directly to and then start from there, just because they do not have all the investments. Because companies themselves also make a lot of investment. They choose a platform, they build a lot of things internally with that, with the hope that that platform will last and it will keep adding, and I can really rely on that platform for a while. If you're starting from scratch, you have the choice of moving somewhere else. But if you've already, it'll be really difficult for Netflix to move away from Amazon and going to Azure, although Azure may actually, in some cases, I don't know, I'm not a PM there, but maybe Azure sales guy is going and saying, look, we have better features, and it might actually be true, but the network effects help. There are more professional programs for AWS than Azure or Google. So let's say you are a professional services person. So that's why the network effects and all of these help, right? If you're a professional, you're much better off getting a certification on AWS versus GCP. Simple as that. Like, if you have to go implement something, like there's going to be more customers asking for AWS. And companies actually help build that, like that community, and invest in that. And especially, I think Amazon is very good at it. Microsoft's really good at building that partner network, and I've seen that a lot working at Microsoft. Like, we get all of the ecosystem players into the life cycle of the product right from the beginning, and it just seems like, why are we even showing anybody these things? But that's how you build and keep the moat. And maybe some product companies don't think that way. They would be like, okay, we're going to build the best, beautiful product, release it out there, and see, and speak it for itself. Any one last?
All right, so how about a round of applause for Bodhi?
Thank you.